The ground shook beneath my feet for exactly 47 seconds. I know because I counted every single one as I watched my parents make the same devastating choice twice. As the ceiling beam crashed down toward Emma's bed, I could have pushed her aside. I could have saved her like I did before. Instead, I stepped back and watched my father dive across the room, shielding his precious adopted daughter with his own body, while the wooden beam that should have hit her struck me instead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. This time, I let them save her first. This time, I didn't fight for their love. Because I had already learned what it felt like to die forgotten and alone, only to wake up 5 years earlier with the memory of every rejection burned into my soul. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even with the gift of rebirth, even knowing exactly what would happen, I still couldn't change the one truth that mattered most. I would never be their real daughter. Emma would always come first. My name is Maya Chen, and I've lived through my 17th birthday twice. The first time I died believing my parents loved me. The second time, I lived knowing they never would. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. Morning in our house on Cherry Lane, the California sunshine streamed through our kitchen windows as Mom bustled around making breakfast. Her dark hair pulled back in the same messy bun she'd worn every morning for as long as I could remember. Dad sat at the breakfast table, reading his newspaper and occasionally glancing up to smile at Emma, who was chattering excitedly about her upcoming art exhibition at school. I sat in my usual spot at the corner of the table, the one closest to the kitchen, so I could help serve and clean up. Not because anyone asked me to, but because it had somehow become my unspoken role in this family. The helpful one, the reliable one, the one who made sure everyone else was taken care of. Emma bounced in her chair, her golden hair catching the morning light in a way that made her look almost ethereal. She had this gift for making even the most mundane moments seem magical, and our parents adored her for it. She'd been with us for 8 years now, ever since she was 9 years old and I was 10, but sometimes I felt like she'd been here longer than me. Mom, you have to see what Mrs. Johnson said about my painting. Emma gushed, pulling out her phone to show the text from her art teacher. She thinks I might actually win the state competition. Mom immediately dropped her spatula and rushed over, leaning down to read the message over Emma's shoulder. Oh, sweetheart, that's incredible. David, come look at this. Dad folded his newspaper and moved to stand behind Emma's chair, his hands resting protectively on her shoulders as he read. The smile that spread across his face was the kind I'd seen in old family photos from before Emma came to us, bright and genuine and full of pride. I always knew you were special, princess, he said, kissing the top of her head. Skulls. For a celebration? How about we take you shopping for a new dress for the exhibition? Something that shows everyone how talented our girl is. Our girl. The words hit me like they always did, a small stab of pain I'd grown accustomed to carrying. I took a bite of my cereal and tried to swallow past the familiar tightness in my throat. What about Maya? Emma asked suddenly, turning to look at me with those wide blue eyes that made everyone fall in love with her instantly. She's been helping me with my art too. Remember how she taught me that shading technique? For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they would acknowledge what I'd contributed or invite me to come. Shopping too? Or even just look at me with a fraction of the warmth they showed Emma every day. Mom glanced at me briefly, her expression pleasant but distant. That's sweet of you to think of your sister, honey. Maya understands that this is your special moment, don't you, Maya? I nodded automatically, the response trained into me through years of practice, of course. This is amazing, Emma. I'm really proud of you. Emma beamed at me, and I could see the genuine affection in her smile. That was the cruelest part of it all. Emma truly cared about me. She didn't mean to be the favorite, didn't ask for the preferential treatment, and certainly didn't realize how much it hurt to watch her receive everything I'd spent my whole life hoping for. She was kind and loving and everything a sister should be, which made it impossible to hate her even when I desperately wanted to. Maybe I could help you pick out the dress, I offered quietly. Oh, that won't be necessary, Mom said, already turning back to the stove. Emma has such a good eye for these things. Besides, don't you have that volunteer shift at the community center today? I did have the volunteer shift, something I'd signed up 4 months ago to help coordinate emergency preparedness workshops for elderly residents. It was important work that mattered. But somehow it always felt like my commitments were the ones that got overlooked when family plans were being made. Right, I said. I almost forgot. The truth was, I never forgot anything. I kept track of everyone's schedules, everyone's preferences, everyone's important dates. I remembered that Dad liked his coffee black on weekdays, but with cream on Sundays. I knew that Mom got anxious when the house wasn't perfectly clean before guests arrived. I had memorized Emma's art supply needs and her favorite restaurants, and the exact way she liked her hair braided for special occasions. But somehow, my own needs always seemed to slip through the cracks. After breakfast, I helped Mom clean the dishes while Dad and Emma planned their shopping trip. They discussed which stores to visit, what style of dress would photograph best, and whether they should stop for lunch at Emma's favorite cafe. I listened to their animated conversation while scrubbing plates, feeling like a ghost observing a family I didn't quite belong to. Maya, honey, could you make sure to stop by the grocery store on your way home from volunteering? Mom asked, handing me a hastily scribbled list. We're having the Petersons over for dinner tomorrow, and I want everything to be perfect. I glanced at the list, noting that it included several specialty items that would require stops at multiple stores. Sure, Mom. No problem. You're such a good girl, she said, patting my shoulder absently before turning her attention back to Emma. Now, sweetheart, what do you think about that boutique on Main Street? The one with the vintage pieces. I finished the dishes and gathered my things for the community center, kissing everyone goodbye before heading out. None of them looked up from their planning session as I left, too absorbed in the excitement of Emma's achievement to notice my departure. The walk to the community center took me through the heart of Riverside Valley, past the familiar landmarks of my childhood. The old oak tree where I used to sit and read when the house felt too crowded, the playground where Emma and I had spent countless afternoons, her laughter echoing off the swings while I pushed her higher and higher. The corner cafe where our family used to go for Sunday brunches, back when those felt more like family traditions than Emma appreciation sessions. I loved this town, loved the way everyone knew each other and looked out for one another. Mrs. Patterson from down the street always waved when she saw me walking by. And Mr. Garcia at the hardware store remembered that I was studying to become an engineer. These small connections felt more genuine than anything I experienced at home, where I often felt like I was performing the role of daughter rather than actually being one. At the community center, I threw myself into my work with the elderly residents. Mrs. Kowalski, a 92-year-old former nurse, was particularly interested in learning about earthquake safety protocols. She'd lived through several major quakes in her lifetime and had stories that both fascinated and terrified me. The key thing, dear, she said as we reviewed the emergency supply checklist, is knowing who you can count on when everything falls apart. Family doesn't always mean blood, and blood doesn't always mean family, if you know what I mean. Her words resonated with me more than she could have known. Have you ever felt like you didn't quite fit in your own family? I asked her quietly. Mrs. Kowalski studied my face with the keen perception that came from decades of reading people. Oh, honey, is that what's been weighing on you? I've seen you in here every week for months, working so hard to help everyone else. When do you take care of yourself? The question caught me off guard, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I don't know. I guess I've never really thought about it that way. Well, maybe it's time you started, she said gently. You've got a good heart, Maya, but a good heart won't mean much if you don't value yourself enough to use it for your own benefit too. I spent the rest of my shift thinking about her words, helping other seniors with their emergency plans while contemplating my own. What would happen if there really was an earthquake? Would my parents even notice if I wasn't there to help coordinate the family's response? Would Emma think to check on me, or would she be too scared and rely on Mom and Dad for comfort? Questions followed me through the grocery store afterward, where I dutifully collected every item on Mom's list, plus a few things I noticed we were running low on at home. The specialty olive oil that Dad liked for his weekend cooking, and the particular brand of tea that helped Mom relax in the evenings. Emma's favorite yogurt, which she went through faster than anyone else in the house. I carried the heavy bags up Cherry Lane as the afternoon sun beat down on my shoulders, pausing to catch my breath at the bottom of our driveway. Through the living room window, I could see Emma modeling what must have been her new dress, while Mom and Dad applauded. She looked radiant, spinning in a circle with her arms outstretched, and their faces glowed with pride and joy. It was a beautiful scene, the kind of family moment that belonged in photo albums and holiday cards. I stood outside for several minutes, watching them through the glass like a director observing actors in a play. They looked so complete, so perfectly content in their bubble of happiness. There was no space for me in that frame, no role for me to play in that particular story. When I finally went inside, they barely looked up from their fashion show. "Oh good, you're back," Mom said. "Could you put those groceries away? We want?" To show Emma how to pose for the photographer tomorrow, I nodded and carried the bags to the kitchen, listening to them discuss lighting and angles while I methodically put away each item. The routine was soothing in its familiarity, even if the underlying emotions weren't. This was my place in the family ecosystem, the one who handled the practical details while everyone else focused on the exciting parts. Later that evening, Mom and Dad had spent an hour helping Emma practice her presentation speech and another hour planning the perfect outfit for the exhibition. I sat in my room working on my college application essays. The deadline was approaching, and I'd been putting off the personal statement because I couldn't figure out how to write about my family situation without sounding bitter or ungrateful. How do you explain that you love your family, but don't feel loved by them? How do you describe the exhaustion of always coming second without making it sound like self-pity? How do you articulate the loneliness of being seen but not truly known? A soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting Mom with some late-night request for help with tomorrow's dinner preparations. Instead, Emma peeked her head in, still wearing the new dress she'd bought earlier. "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course," I said, closing my laptop and patting the space beside me on my bed. "What's up?" Emma sat down and immediately curled up against my side, something she'd done since she was little. Despite all my complicated feelings about our family dynamics, I genuinely loved these quiet moments with her. When it was just the two of us, without the performance of family life, we could just be sisters. "I feel weird about all the attention today," she said quietly. "Like, I'm happy about the art thing. But sometimes I worry that Mom and Dad care more about my achievements than they do about me as a person, you know?" The irony of her concern wasn't lost on me, but I could hear the genuine worry in her voice. "What do you mean?" "Well, like, what if I hadn't been good at art? What if I was just a regular kid who didn't win competitions or get special recognition? Would they still love me the same way?" She looked up at me with troubled eyes. "Sometimes I feel like I have to keep being amazing, or they might change their minds about wanting me." My heart ached for her, even as part of me wanted to scream, that she had no idea what it felt like to be the regular kid who didn't get special recognition. But Emma's fears were real and valid, even if they were different from mine. The pressure to maintain perfection was its own kind of burden. "Emma, they chose you," I said gently. "When you came to live with us, they chose you specifically because they wanted you to be part of our family. That's not something that changes based on what you accomplish." "But what about you?" she asked. "You're amazing at everything you do, but they never make a big deal about it. You're so smart and organized and you help everyone, but it's like they just expect it from you. That doesn't seem fair." I was quiet for a long moment, surprised by her perceptiveness. I'd never realized she noticed the difference in how we were treated, and I wasn't sure how to respond without making her feel guilty for something that wasn't her fault. "Families are complicated," I said finally. "Mom and Dad love us both, just in different ways. You ever feel like you don't really belong here?" Emma asked softly. The question hit me like a physical blow, because it was exactly what I'd been feeling for years, but had never dared to voice. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Do you?" "All the time," she whispered. "But at least I know why I don't belong. I'm not actually part of this family." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You are, and if you don't feel like you belong, then maybe none of us really do. We sat in silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. Outside my window, I could hear the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a neighborhood dog. Normal sounds of a normal evening in a normal family home, except nothing about this conversation felt normal. "Maya," Emma said eventually. "Yeah, if something bad ever happened, like really bad, would you save me?" The question seemed to come out of nowhere, and I turned to look at her in confusion. What kind of question is that? Of course I would. Why would you even ask? "I don't know," she said, snuggling closer to me. "I just had this weird dream last night about an earthquake and everyone was trying to save me, but they couldn't reach me in time. It felt so real and scary." A chill ran down my spine at her words, though I couldn't explain why. "It was just a dream, Em. But yes, I would always try to save you. You're my sister. Promise. I promise." We talked for another hour about everything and nothing, the way sisters do when the rest of the world is asleep, and secrets feel safer to share. Emma told me about her worries that she wasn't smart enough for college, and I confessed that I sometimes felt invisible in our own house. She admitted that she'd always wished she could be more like me, responsible and capable, while I revealed that I'd spent years wishing I could be more like her, effortlessly lovable and special. When she finally went back to her room, I sat alone in the darkness, thinking about our conversation. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen by someone in my family. Even if that someone was struggling with her own sense of belonging, maybe Mrs. Kowalski had been right about family not always meaning blood. Maybe the sister bond Emma and I shared was more real than the parent-child relationships that felt so forced and one-sided. I tried to return to my college essay, but the words wouldn't come. How do you write about family when you're not even sure what the word means anymore? How do you explain your dreams for the future when you're still trying to understand your place in the present? Eventually, I gave up and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Emma's question about the earthquake kept echoing in my mind, along with Mrs. Kowalski's words about knowing who you can count on when everything falls apart. I found myself making mental lists of emergency supplies, evacuation routes, and safety protocols, as if preparing for disaster could somehow protect me from the emotional earthquakes that seemed to shake my world on a regular basis. I had no way of knowing that in less than 24 hours, all of my emergency planning would be put to the ultimate test. I couldn't have imagined that I would face a choice between saving myself and saving Emma, or that the decision I made would haunt me for the rest of my life and beyond. But as I finally drifted off to sleep that night, I dreamed of falling buildings and desperate choices, of hands reaching through rubble and voices calling names that might or might not include mine. In my dream, I was running toward someone. I couldn't tell if I was the one doing the saving or the one who needed to be saved. The last thing I remembered before waking up was the sound of my own voice, screaming Emma's name into a void that swallowed all sound and left me alone in the silence of my own making. The morning of October 15th started like any other Thursday, except for the subtle tension that seemed to hang in the air like electricity before a storm. I woke up early, as I always did, and padded downstairs to find Dad already in the kitchen, staring out the window with his coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips. "You're up early," I said, reaching for my own mug from the cabinet. He startled, slightly, as if he'd forgotten other people lived in the house. Couldn't sleep. Had the strangest dreams all night. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "You ever have one of those nights where your brain just won't shut off?" Thinking about my own restless sleep filled with images of crumbling walls and reaching hands. "What were you dreaming about?" "Earthquakes, of all things," Dad said with a nervous laugh. "Probably all that emergency preparedness stuff you've been working on at the community center. Got me thinking about whether we're really ready for the big one, you know." Cold chill ran down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. California had always lived with the threat of earthquakes, and we'd experienced plenty of minor tremors over the years. But something about Dad's words felt ominous, like a warning I should have been paying attention to. "We've got the emergency kit in the basement," I said, trying to sound casual. "Water, flashlights, first aid supplies." Mrs. Patterson helped me put together a pretty comprehensive setup last month. Dad looked at me with something that might have been pride, if I squinted hard enough. "You've always been so responsible, Maya. Sometimes I think you're more prepared for life than any of us." Before I could respond to what felt like the closest thing to genuine recognition I'd gotten from him in months, Mom came bustling into the kitchen with her usual morning energy. She was already dressed and made up, her dark hair styled perfectly. Despite the early hour, "Good, you're both up," she said, immediately launching into the day's agenda. "David, don't forget you promised to drive Emma to school early so she can set up for the exhibition. Maya, I need you to pick up the flowers for tonight's dinner party after school. Mrs. Peterson specifically requested those white roses from the florist on Elm Street." I felt the familiar sinking sensation in my stomach. "I have my college interview this afternoon, remember? The one with the Berkeley admissions officer?" Mom paused in her bustling, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "Oh, that's today. I thought that was next week." "It's been on the calendar for 2 months," I said quietly. I reminded everyone last weekend, "Well, can't you reschedule? The Petersons are coming over specifically to meet Emma and hear about her art scholarship. This is important for her future."
Ow.
The words hit me like a slap, even though I should have been used to this pattern by now. Emma's needs always took precedence. Emma's future always mattered more. Emma's schedule always came first. But this was my college interview, possibly my only chance to impress someone who could change the entire trajectory of my life. "The admissions officer is only in town today," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't reschedule." "The flowers aren't more important than Maya's interview," Dad interjected. And I felt a flutter of hope that maybe, just this once, someone would stand up for me. But Mom was already shaking her head. "The florist closes at 4, and Maya's interview isn't until 3:30. She'll have plenty of time." I wanted to point out that interviews could run long, that I might need time to decompress afterward. That rushing from a high-stakes meeting to pick up flowers for Emma's celebration dinner felt like adding insult to injury. Instead, I found myself nodding automatically, the response programmed into me through years of conditioning. "Sure, Mom. I'll make it work." Emma appeared in the doorway just then, already dressed in her exhibition outfit. She looked radiant, practically glowing with excitement and nervous energy. The sight of her genuine joy made it impossible to feel truly angry, even though I desperately wanted to be furious at the whole situation. "Maya," she said, rushing over to give me a hug. "I'm so nervous I can barely breathe. What if nobody likes my paintings? What if the scholarship committee thinks I'm not good enough?" "You're going to be amazing," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to wish failure on Emma. Her talent was real, her passion was genuine, and she deserved recognition for her hard work. "Your art speaks to people, Em. Trust yourself." She squeezed me tighter. "You always know exactly what to say. I don't know what I'd do without you." The words should have been comforting, but they only highlighted the contradiction that had defined our relationship from the beginning. Emma genuinely loved and appreciated me, but she was also the reason I felt invisible in my own family. She didn't ask to be the favorite, didn't demand the preferential treatment, but she received it anyway, leaving me to exist in the shadows of her brightness. After breakfast, I walked to school alone while Dad drove Emma early for her setup. The morning air felt heavy and still, like the atmosphere was holding its breath. Other students seemed more subdued than usual, and I noticed several people looking up at the sky with confused expressions, as if they were expecting something to happen but couldn't quite name what. My first period physics teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, seemed particularly on edge. He kept glancing at his phone and adjusting the seismograph display he kept in the corner of the classroom. When someone asked if we were expecting any seismic activity, he just shrugged and said that the instruments had been acting strange all week. "Probably nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Just some unusual readings from the SC monitoring stations up north." The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I couldn't concentrate on any of my classes. My mind split between anxiety about my interview and a growing sense of unease that I couldn't shake. During lunch, I found myself gravitating toward Emma's exhibition setup in the main hallway, where she was arranging her paintings with the help of several friends. The display was stunning. Emma had always been talented, but seeing her work presented professionally like this made me realize just how gifted she really was. Her paintings captured emotions and moments with a depth that took my breath away. There was one in particular, a portrait of our family gathered around the dinner table, that made my chest tighten with recognition. In the painting, Mom and Dad were looking at each other with warm smiles, while Emma leaned forward eagerly, gesturing with animated hands. And there, slightly blurred in the background, was a figure that was clearly meant to be me. Turned away from the table, my face hidden, my body language suggesting someone who was present but not really part of the scene. It was exactly how I felt every day, captured with an artist's eye for truth. "That one's my favorite," Emma said, appearing beside me. "Call it family dinner." I wanted to show how families have all these layers, you know? Like everyone's having the same experience, but also their own completely different experience. At the same time, I stared at the painting, wondering if Emma had intentionally depicted me as an outsider, or if it had just happened naturally as she painted what she observed. Either way, it was uncomfortably accurate. "It's beautiful," I said, because it was. "You really captured something special." The afternoon flew by in a blur of nervous energy. I spent my free period in the library trying to review my interview. Notes and practice answers to potential questions. But my concentration kept being broken by the sound of students and teachers talking in hushed, urgent tones about strange animal behavior and reports of minor tremors from neighboring towns. At 3 o'clock, I gathered my portfolio and headed to the conference room where the Berkeley admissions officer was conducting interviews. Her name was Dr. Sarah Kim, and she had an impressive background in engineering that made me even more nervous about making a good impression. The interview started well. Dr. Kim seemed genuinely interested in my volunteer work at the community center and my passion for earthquake-resistant building design. We discussed my academic record, my extracurricular activities, and my long-term career goals. I felt like I was finally getting the chance to show someone who I really was. Beyond my role as the reliable daughter and helpful sister, your application. Essay about finding your own identity within family expectations was particularly compelling. Dr. Kim said, flipping through my file, "Can you tell me more about how you've learned to balance personal growth with family obligations?" It was exactly the kind of question I'd been hoping for. A chance to talk about the challenges I'd faced without sounding bitter or ungrateful. I launched into a careful explanation about learning to value my own goals while still being supportive of family members, about finding ways to contribute meaningfully while also pursuing my own dreams. We were deep in discussion about my ideas for innovative architectural solutions when the room began to shake. It started as a subtle vibration, the kind you might dismiss as a large truck passing by, but within seconds, it escalated to a rolling motion that made the conference table sway and the ceiling lights swing wildly overhead. Dr. Kim and I looked at each other with wide eyes as books began falling from shelves and the sound of car alarms filled the air outside. "Get under the table," I said automatically, my emergency preparedness training kicking in. We dove beneath the sturdy conference table, just as the shaking intensified, transforming from a rolling motion to violent lurching that made it impossible to stand. The earthquake lasted for what felt like hours but was probably closer to 3 minutes. When the shaking finally stopped, Dr. Kim and I crawled out from under the table to survey the damage. The conference room was in shambles, with overturned chairs and scattered papers, but the building seemed structurally sound. "Are you okay?" I asked, helping Dr. Kim to her feet. She nodded, though she looked shaken. That was significant. Probably a 6 or 7 on the Richter scale, if I had to guess. My first thought was of Emma and her exhibition. The main hallway where she'd set up her display would have been full of students and visitors when the earthquake hit. Without thinking, I told Dr. Kim I needed to check on my family and ran from the room, leaving my portfolio and any chance of completing the interview behind. The hallways were chaos. Students and teachers were evacuating according to emergency protocols, but I could hear crying and shouting from multiple directions. Emergency lighting had kicked in, casting eerie shadows as I pushed against the flow of people heading for the exits. When I reached the main hallway, my heart stopped. The area where Emma's exhibition had been set up was completely destroyed. Display boards had toppled over, paintings were scattered across the floor, and a section of the ceiling had partially collapsed, sending chunks of plaster and metal everywhere. I could see Emma trapped beneath one of the fallen display boards, her face pale and streaked with tears. Mom and Dad were already there, having arrived for the exhibition just before the earthquake hit. They were frantically trying to lift the heavy board while Emma cried out in pain. "Maya," Emma called when she saw me. "Help me, please." Even as I started forward, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A large section of the ceiling directly above Emma was sagging ominously, held up by what looked like a single, partially severed support beam. Chunks of plaster were still falling, and I could hear the metal groaning under the strain. Moment, I faced the first real choice of my life. I could rush forward and try to help lift the display board, potentially putting myself directly under the failing ceiling section. Or I could try to convince my parents to move away from the dangerous area, possibly leaving Emma trapped for longer, but keeping everyone safer. "Dad, stop!" I called out. "Look up. That whole section is about to come down." But Dad wasn't listening. He was completely focused on Emma, pulling at the display board with desperate strength. "We've got to get her out of here. Maya, help us lift this thing." I looked around frantically for another option, some way to help Emma without putting everyone at risk. The maintenance closet nearby had a crowbar that could give us better leverage, or I could run to get help from the emergency responders who were surely on their way. But as I hesitated, weighing the options, the decision was made for me. The ceiling beam gave way with a sound like thunder. A massive section of concrete and metal came crashing down exactly where I would have been standing if I'd rushed forward to help. The impact sent up a cloud of dust and debris that made it impossible to see for several seconds. When the air cleared, I realized that the falling ceiling had actually created a protective barrier around Emma, trapping her more securely, but also shielding her from further collapse. Dad and Mom were on the other side of the debris pile, cut off from Emma but uninjured. And I was standing exactly where I'd been when I'd stopped to assess the situation, close enough to hear Emma calling for help, but separated from her by tons of rubble. "Emma," Mom screamed, trying to climb over the debris pile. "Hold on, baby. We're coming. I'm okay," Emma called back, her voice muffled but strong. "I'm not hurt badly, just stuck." In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching and the sound of emergency responders coordinating rescue efforts. The rational part of my brain knew that professional help was on the way, that Emma would be freed safely, and that rushing into danger wouldn't actually help anyone. But the emotional part of my brain was screaming that I'd failed my sister, that I'd chosen my own safety over hers, that I was exactly the selfish person I'd always feared I might be. "Maya," Dad said urgently, "can you get around to the other side? Maybe there's a way to reach her from the back of the hall." I nodded and took off running, navigating around the debris field to look for another way to reach Emma. The back hallway was less damaged, and I could see a gap in the rubble that might be wide enough for someone to crawl through without thinking about the risks. I squeezed into the narrow space, ignoring the sharp edges of broken concrete and the ominous creaking sounds from overhead. The gap was tighter than it had looked from the outside, and I had to wiggle forward on my stomach, pushing aside chunks of plaster and twisted metal. "Emma," I called out as I got closer. "I'm coming. Are you hurt?" "Maya, oh my God, you're crazy. It's not safe in there." But I kept crawling forward until I could see her face through a small opening in the debris. She was pinned beneath the display board, but as she'd said, she didn't appear to be seriously injured. Scared and uncomfortable, but not in immediate danger. "I'm going to try to move this board," I said, bracing my feet against a solid piece of concrete and grasping the edge of the display panel. "No, don't. What if it shifts and makes things worse?" She was right, of course. Moving the wrong piece of debris could cause the entire pile to shift, potentially crushing both of us. But I couldn't just leave her there, couldn't crawl back out and wait for professional help while my sister was trapped and scared. "Trust me," I said, and began carefully working to lift the board just enough to create more space around Emma. It took what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Before I managed to create enough clearance for Emma to wriggle free, she crawled toward me through the narrow gap, both of us covered in dust and debris, until we reached the back hallway where it was safe to stand up. The moment we were clear of the collapse zone, Emma threw her arms around me and burst into tears. You came for me, she sobbed. You actually came for me. Her words hit me with unexpected force. Of course I'd come for her. Despite all my complicated feelings about our family dynamics, despite the years of feeling overlooked and undervalued, Emma was my sister. When it really mattered, when her safety was at stake, there had never been any question about what I would do. I promised I would save you, I said, holding her tight while she cried. I always keep my promises. By the time we made it back to the main evacuation area, Mom and Dad were beside themselves with worry. The relief on their faces when they saw us emerge safely was genuine and overwhelming. For a moment, it felt like we were actually a family, united by shared fear and gratitude rather than divided by favoritism and expectations. Oh my God, Maya, Mom said, pulling me into a fierce hug. You could have been killed. What were you thinking, going in there alone? It was the most emotion I'd seen from her directed at me in years, and I found myself crying despite my attempts to stay composed. I couldn't leave her, I said. I couldn't just wait and do nothing. Dad wrapped both Emma and me in his arms, and for just a moment I felt like I belonged. Like I was valuable, necessary, loved for who I was, rather than what I could provide. But the feeling didn't last long. As the immediate crisis passed and the reality of the situation set in, attention quickly shifted back to Emma and her needs. Her paintings were destroyed, her exhibition was ruined, and her scholarship opportunity was likely gone along with everything else. Don't worry, sweetheart, Mom said, smoothing Emma's hair while the paramedics checked her for injuries.
I will
figure this out. If the scholarship committee will give you an extension, or we can arrange a private showing. All my work, Emma said, staring at the pile of debris that had once been her carefully arranged display. Months and months of painting, and it's all destroyed. I wanted to point out that everyone was safe, that artwork could be replaced. But lives couldn't. That the important thing was that we'd all survived a major earthquake without serious injury. But I could see how devastated Emma was, and I understood that losing her art felt like losing part of herself. The rest of the evening was a blur of emergency protocols and damage assessment. School was canceled indefinitely while structural engineers evaluated the building's safety. The dinner party for the Petersons was obviously canceled. Mom spent considerable time on the phone, explaining the situation and rescheduling. For a later date, by the time we made it home, exhaustion had set in for all of us. Our house had sustained minor damage, mostly fallen pictures and broken dishes, but it was still livable. We spent the evening cleaning up and checking on neighbors, grateful to have shelter and power when many others in the community weren't as fortunate. As I swept up broken glass in the kitchen, I thought about my interview with Dr. Kim and wondered if I'd ever get another chance to complete the application process. Probably not, I realized. The earthquake would be a convenient excuse for why my Berkeley dreams had fallen through, even though the real reason was that I'd chosen my sister's safety over my own future. But strangely, I didn't feel bitter about that choice. For the first time in my life, I'd acted on pure instinct rather than obligation, and the instinct had been to protect Emma no matter what it cost me. Maybe that said something important about who I really was, beneath all the resentment and hurt feelings. Later that night, as I lay in bed listening to the aftershocks rattle my windows, I thought about Emma's question from the night before. She'd asked if I would save her if something bad happened, and I'd promised that I would. I'd kept that promise, even when it meant risking my own safety and sacrificing my own opportunities. But I wondered if anyone would make the same choice for me. The weeks following the earthquake blurred together in a haze of reconstruction and routine. Our house became a hub of activity as contractors assessed the damage and neighbors stopped by to check on each other. The community spirit was remarkable, everyone pitching in to help those who had lost more than we had. But underneath the surface camaraderie, I could feel the familiar patterns reasserting themselves. Emma's destroyed artwork became the central tragedy of our family's earthquake story. Overshadowing everything else that had happened that day, Mom spent hours on the phone with insurance companies, art supply stores, and scholarship committees, determined to rebuild Emma's portfolio before any deadlines passed. We can't let this setback derail her entire future, Mom explained to anyone who would listen. She's so talented, and this was just terrible timing. Dad threw himself into the project with equal fervor, converting the garage into a temporary art studio so Emma could start working immediately. He installed professional lighting, bought the best easels money could buy, and even hired a photographer to document Emma's new pieces as she completed them. I watched all of this unfold from my usual position on the sidelines, helping where I could, but never quite feeling like my contributions mattered. When Mom needed someone to drive to art supply stores, I volunteered. When Dad needed help moving furniture to create Emma's new workspace, I was there. When Emma needed a model for figure drawing practice, I posed patiently for hours while she sketched. My own college applications became an afterthought in the chaos. When I mentioned that I needed to contact Berkeley about rescheduling my interview, Mom absently suggested I could try again next year. When I brought up other schools that were still accepting applications, Dad pointed out that the family budget was stretched thin with all the earthquake repairs and Emma's art supply needs. Maybe you should consider starting at community college. He suggested one evening over dinner, get your general education requirements out of the way for cheaper, then transfer when things are more stable financially. The suggestion felt like a door slamming shut on my dreams, but I nodded agreeably because that's what I always did. Emma looked up from her pasta with a concerned expression, clearly sensing the undercurrent of disappointment I was trying to hide. What about that scholarship you were researching? She asked. The one for students interested in earthquake engineering? I was touched that she'd remembered, especially given everything else on her mind. The deadline passed while school was closed. They weren't offering extensions for earthquake-related delays. That's so unfair, Emma said, setting down her fork with more force than necessary. Maya saved my life, and she's being punished for it because she missed some arbitrary deadline. The room went quiet for a moment. It was the first time anyone had directly acknowledged what had happened during the earthquake. The fact that I'd risked my safety to rescue Emma from the debris. We'd all been so focused on moving forward that we'd never actually talked about those terrifying minutes when everything could have gone wrong. Nobody's being punished, Mom said carefully. Sometimes life throws us curveballs, and we have to adapt. Maya's smart and capable. She'll find her path. But she already knew her path, Emma pressed. She's wanted to be an engineer since we were kids. She's been volunteering at the community center, learning about earthquake safety for months. This was her chance. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Emma, we appreciate your concern for your sister, but these are adult decisions that require considering the whole family situation. I felt a familiar surge of resignation wash over me. This was how it always went. Emma would notice an injustice, speak up on my behalf, and then get gently redirected while I remained invisible. The difference was that this time I could see the pattern clearly instead of just feeling confused and hurt. It's okay, Em, I said quietly. Dad's right. Community college isn't a bad option. Emma wasn't ready to let it go. What if we used some of the money you're spending on my art supplies for Maya's application fees instead? I can make do with cheaper materials. Absolutely not, Mom said firmly. Your artwork is time-sensitive. Scholarship committees won't wait indefinitely, and this is your senior year. Oh. Maya has more flexibility in her timeline. But that's exactly the problem, Emma said, her voice rising with frustration. Maya always has to be flexible. Maya always has to wait. Maya always has to make do with less, because my needs are supposedly more urgent. Oh yeah 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 yow 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 wah yow yow wah wah yow yow wah yow yow wah yow wah wah yow ya wah ya 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 wah you're I'm drum so I'm drum I'm jumping to I'm jumping to ya wait I'd never wanted Emma to feel guilty about the family dynamics, Never wanted her to carry the burden of recognizing how differently we were treated. "Emma, that's enough," Dad said sternly. "You're being dramatic and unfair. This family has always supported both of you girls equally." The statement was so blatantly untrue that I almost laughed, but Emma beat me to a response. "Really? Then why is Maya's college fund paying for my art supplies? Why did we cancel Maya's celebration dinner when she won the science fair, but we're planning a whole party for when I finish my replacement portfolio? Why does Maya do twice as much housework as me but get half as much allowance?" I stared at my sister in shock. I'd never realized she'd been keeping track of these disparities, never known she was aware of the countless small ways our parents showed favoritism. Her passionate defense of me was both wonderful and mortifying. "Lady, you're grounded," Mom said sharply. "Go to your room and think about how ungrateful you're being. This family has given you everything, and this is how you repay us?" Emma's face crumpled, and I could see the immediate regret in her expression. She'd pushed too hard, said too much, and now she was facing the consequences. But before she could apologize or back down, I found myself speaking up. "She's not being ungrateful," I said quietly. "She's telling the truth." Both parents turned to stare at me in surprise. I never contradicted them, never made waves, never forced uncomfortable conversations. But something about watching Emma get punished for defending me made me feel sick to my stomach. "Maya, don't make this worse," Mom warned. "I'm not making anything worse. I'm just agreeing with what Emma said. It is true that my college fund has been paying for her art supplies. It is true that you canceled my science fair celebration, but you're planning a party for her portfolio completion. And it is true that I've been doing more chores for less allowance since Emma moved in." Dad's face was getting red, a sure sign that his temper was rising. "We have always treated you girls fairly. If you feel otherwise, that's your own perception problem." "Then let's test that," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "Let's sit down and make a list of all the money spent on each of us in the last year, all the time spent at our respective events and activities, all the family conversations that centered on each of our interests and achievements. Let's actually look at the numbers." "This is ridiculous," Mom said, standing up from the table. "I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated by my own children about my parenting choices. Why not?" Emma asked, emboldened by my unexpected support. "If you really believe you've been fair, then the numbers will prove it." But Mom was already walking away, muttering about ungrateful teenagers and how hard it was to blend a family. Dad followed her, leaving Emma and me alone at the dinner table with our half-eaten meals and the wreckage of what had started as a normal family evening. "I'm sorry," Emma said immediately. "I didn't mean to drag you into this. I just couldn't stand listening to them dismiss your dreams like they didn't matter." "Don't apologize," I said firmly. "I'm glad you said something. I've been thinking those things for years but never had the courage to voice them." "Really? You never seemed bothered by it." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I got very good at hiding my feelings. I thought if I was helpful enough, agreeable enough, perfect enough, maybe they'd love me the way they love you. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Maya, they do love you. They just have a weird way of showing it. Do they, though? Or do they? Love the version of me that makes their lives easier. The daughter who doesn't ask for much, doesn't cause trouble, doesn't have needs that interfere with their priorities? I don't know," Emma admitted quietly. "But I know I love you. Real you, not some perfect, helpful version." Her words meant more to me than she could have known. In a family where I often felt like a supporting character in everyone else's story, having one person who truly saw and valued me was everything. We spent the rest of the evening in Emma's room, talking about things we'd never discussed before. She told me about the pressure she felt to constantly achieve, to justify her place in a family that had chosen her rather than being stuck with her. I told her about the loneliness of always coming second, of having my own needs dismissed as less important than everyone else's. "I never wanted to be the favorite," Emma said as we sat on her bed sharing a bag of chips we'd smuggled upstairs. "I would have been happy just being equal. I know, and I never blamed you for it. Not really. You can't help how they treat you any more than I can change how they treat me." Right. What if we stopped playing along with their expectations? I considered her question seriously. What would that look like? Well, for starters, you could stop doing everyone's laundry except your own. Stop keeping track of everyone's schedules. Stop automatically volunteering for every unpleasant task. And you could stop accepting special treatment. Turn down the expensive art supplies you don't actually need. Refuse to let them throw parties that exclude me. We sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating what it would mean to fundamentally change our roles in the family ecosystem. It felt dangerous and exciting and terrifying all at once. They won't like it, Emma said finally. Probably not. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being liked isn't as important as being respected. The next few days were tense as Mom and Dad waited for us to apologize for our dinner table confrontation. When the apology didn't come, they tried different tactics. First came the guilt trips about how hard they worked to provide for us. Then came the lectures about family loyalty and gratitude. Finally came the punishment phase, where privileges were revoked and extra chores were assigned. But Emma and I had made a pact to support each other, and that made all the difference. When Mom tried to guilt me into doing Emma's laundry, Emma intervened and insisted on doing her own. When Dad attempted to make me feel selfish for wanting college application money, Emma offered to get a part-time job to pay for her own art supplies. Our united front seemed to confuse our parents more than anger them. They were used to dealing with us individually, playing on our separate insecurities and needs. But together, we were harder to manipulate and control. The real test came when Mrs. Peterson called to reschedule the dinner party she'd missed due to the earthquake. Mom immediately went into planning mode, discussing menus and decorations with the same enthusiasm she'd always shown for events centered around Emma's achievements. I assume Maya will be helping with the cooking and serving, Mom said, as she made notes for the evening. Actually, Emma said calmly, I think we should hire a caterer this time. Maya shouldn't have to spend her Saturday being a waitress at a party celebrating my art. Mom looked genuinely confused. But Maya enjoys helping with these events. She's always so good at making sure everything runs smoothly. Have you ever asked her if she enjoys it? Emma pressed. Or do you just assume she's happy to do whatever's needed? Of course she enjoys it. If she didn't, she would say something. I realized this was my moment to speak up, to stop letting other people interpret my feelings and start expressing them myself. Actually, I don't enjoy it. I do it because it's expected, but I'd rather spend my Saturday studying or volunteering or literally anything else. Well, if that's how you really feel, Mom said, clearly hurt and defensive, then I suppose we'll have to make other arrangements. Thank you, I said simply, refusing to apologize for having preferences and boundaries. The dinner party went ahead as planned, but with a professional caterer and Emma insisting that I be introduced as her sister rather than as someone there to serve the guests. It was a small change, but it felt monumental to me. For the first time at one of these events, I was treated like a family member rather than hired help. Mrs. Peterson was gracious and complimentary about Emma's artwork, as expected. But she also asked about my own interests and plans, treating me as a person worth getting to know rather than just Emma's helpful sister. When I mentioned my interest in earthquake engineering, she revealed that her late husband had been a structural engineer and shared some of his insights about building design and seismic zones. Should reach out to his old firm, she suggested. Writing down a contact name and number, they offer internships for promising students, and they might be interested in your community center work. It was the first concrete lead I'd gotten toward my career goals since the earthquake. And it came from treating myself as someone worthy of professional consideration rather than just a supporting player in Emma's story. After the guests left that evening, Emma and I helped clean up without being asked, but we worked together as partners rather than with me taking on the bulk of the responsibility. When Mom commented that the evening had gone well despite the unusual arrangements, Emma and I exchanged a look of shared understanding. Change was possible. We were proving it one small decision at a time. But I had no way of knowing that all of our progress was about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible. The aftershocks from the first earthquake had been gradually diminishing, and life seemed to be returning to a new normal. What I didn't know was that the geological forces that had caused the first quake were far from finished. and that another larger earthquake was building pressure along the fault lines beneath our town. I couldn't have predicted that in just a few days I would face the same impossible choice that had defined my original life.
Ow.
But with completely different knowledge and perspective. I had no idea that my newfound sense of self-worth was about to be tested against the ultimate sacrifice, that the decision I made would change everything not just for me, but for everyone I loved. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me, I felt a strange sense of foreboding. The air felt heavy again, the way it had before the first earthquake, and I found myself mentally reviewing the emergency protocols I'd learned at the community center. But this time, I wasn't just thinking about how to save my family. For the first time in my life, I was also thinking about how to save myself. The second earthquake hit on a Tuesday morning at exactly 7:43 a.m., and this time I was ready for it. I woke up that morning with the strangest sensation, like I was living through a dream I'd had before. Every detail felt familiar yet impossible. The way the light filtered through my bedroom curtains, the sound of Dad making coffee downstairs, even the particular bird song coming from the oak tree outside my window. But layered over this familiarity was something else entirely, the complete knowledge of what was about to happen. I remember dying. I remember the weight of the ceiling beam crushing my chest. I lay trapped and forgotten beneath the rubble. I remember the slow fade of consciousness as my life drained away, knowing that even in my final moments, I was still invisible to the people who were supposed to love me most. But somehow, impossibly, I was here again. 17 years old, lying in my bedroom on Cherry Lane, with 5 years of memories that hadn't happened yet, burning bright in my mind like a roadmap of everything I needed to change. The knowledge was overwhelming and crystal clear at the same time. I knew that at 7:43 the Hayward Fault would shift dramatically, sending a magnitude 7.2 earthquake through Riverside Valley. I knew that the main support beam in the school's east wing would fail, crushing Emma beneath the debris of her art exhibition. I knew that I would have exactly 47 seconds to make a choice that would define not just my own fate, but the entire trajectory of my family's future. And this time, I was going to make a different choice. I got dressed quickly, my hands shaking as I pulled on jeans and a sweater. In my previous life, I'd worn my interview outfit to school that day, the navy blue dress and cardigan that I'd hoped would impress Dr. Kim from Berkeley. Dr. Kim wouldn't matter this time. The interview that had seemed so important before was nothing compared to what I now understood about my own worth. Downstairs, the same scene was playing out exactly. As I remembered, Dad sat at the breakfast table with his newspaper. Mom bustled around the kitchen making pancakes, and Emma bounced excitedly in her chair as she talked about her art exhibition. But now I could see it all through different eyes, could recognize the patterns and dynamics that had taken me years to understand the first time around. "Maya, honey, could you help me flip these pancakes?" Mom called out, just as she had before. "Actually, I need to make a phone call first," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. I stepped out onto the back porch and dialed the number for Riverside Valley Emergency Services. When the dispatcher answered, I took a deep breath and delivered the message I'd been rehearsing in my head since I woke up. "This is Maya Chen on Cherry Lane. I need to report. Prediction of seismic activity. Based on animal behavior patterns and minor tremor data, I believe we're going to experience a significant earthquake this morning, probably around 7:45. The high school is particularly vulnerable due to the recent structural damage. From the October earthquake, the dispatcher was patient but skeptical, as I'd expected. Earthquake prediction wasn't an exact science. Teenagers calling in with dire warnings probably wasn't uncommon in California. But I'd done my research during those 5 years of memories, and I knew enough technical terms and geological details to sound credible. "I understand this sounds unusual," I continued, "but I've been working with Mrs. Kowalski at the community center on earthquake preparedness, and we've been tracking some concerning data. At minimum, could you contact the high school and suggest they avoid having large gatherings in the East Wing today?" The dispatcher promised to pass along my concerns to the appropriate authorities, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. It wasn't enough, but it was something. At least there would be a record of the warning, something that might save lives, even if it couldn't save my family from the choice we were about to face. When I came back inside, Emma was showing Mom and Dad a photograph on her phone, the same image of her latest painting that had made them so proud in my original timeline. The painting was beautiful, a landscape of the hills around our town with storm clouds gathering overhead. Looking at it now, it seemed almost prophetic. "The exhibition starts at 8, Emma was saying, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mrs. Johnson thinks the scholarship committee will be really impressed with this piece, especially will be." "They're right when it opens," Dad promised, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Front row seats to watch our talented daughter shine. I felt the familiar pang of exclusion, but this time it was tempered by something stronger. The knowledge that, in exactly 53 minutes, none of this would matter. The exhibition would be destroyed, Emma would be trapped, and my parents would face the ultimate test of their priorities. "I think I'll come early too," I said casually, stabbing my pancakes with more force than necessary. "I want to see Emma's display before it gets crowded." Emma's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Really? That would be amazing. You can help me make sure everything looks perfect?" "Of course she wants to help," Mom said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maya's always so supportive of your achievements, Emma." The words stung just as much as they had the first time, but I forced myself to smile and nod. There was no point in starting the same old arguments when I knew how the morning was going to end. Instead, I focused on memorizing every detail of my family's faces, storing up these last moments of normalcy before everything changed forever. At 7:35, we all piled into Dad's car for the short drive to school. I sat in the back seat next to Emma, watching her fidget nervously with her exhibition notes while Mom and Dad discussed their plans for the day. In my original timeline, this car ride had been filled with my own anxiety about the Berkeley interview. Now it felt like watching actors perform a play I'd seen before, knowing that the final act would be nothing like what any of them expected. "You seem different today," Emma said quietly, leaning closer to me. "More, I don't know, calm. Usually you're super nervous before big events." "I guess I've learned that some things are more important than others," I replied, which was the absolute truth, even if she couldn't understand what I meant. We arrived at school with 8 minutes to spare. The parking lot was already filling up with parents and community members coming to see the student art exhibitions. Just as I remembered, Mrs. Johnson stood near the entrance, greeting visitors, and directing them toward the main hallway where the displays were set up. Emma practically bounced out of the car, her nervousness transformed into eager anticipation. "Come on, let's go make sure my paintings are hanging straight." I followed, my family into the building, my heart pounding with knowledge and dread. The hallway looked exactly as it had in my memories, colorful artwork lining the walls, students making last-minute adjustments to their displays, parents taking photos and offering encouragement. But now I could see the hidden danger in every detail. The support beams were already straining under the building's weight. Emma's display was in the exact same location where I'd found her trapped in my original timeline, directly beneath the weakest section of the ceiling. Her paintings looked magnificent under the specially installed lighting, but all I could see was the death trap waiting to spring. "These are incredible, sweetheart," Dad said, putting his arm around Emma's shoulders as he admired her work. "The scholarship committee would have to be crazy not to recognize your talent." "The lighting really makes them pop," Mom added, taking photos from multiple angles. "You should be so proud of yourself, Emma." I stood slightly apart from the family group, scanning the ceiling and calculating trajectories. In my original timeline, the earthquake had lasted for 2 minutes and 17 seconds. The main support beam would fail at the 1 minute and 30-second mark, sending debris cascading down exactly where Emma was standing. I would have 37 seconds to get her clear of the danger zone, but this time I wasn't planning to throw myself into harm's way to save her. This time, I was going to save us both. "Emma," I said suddenly, interrupting Mom's photographer session, "could you help me with something? I want to get a good picture of your landscape painting, but the angle is better from over there," pointed to a spot near the far wall. Well, away from the ceiling's weak point, Emma looked confused, but nodded agreeably, always willing to accommodate a reasonable request. "Actually, let's get a family photo first," Dad suggested. all of us together in front of Emma's masterpiece. My blood ran cold. A family photo would put all of us directly in the danger zone at exactly the wrong moment. I needed to get everyone away from Emma's display without seeming suspicious or causing panic. Great idea, I said, thinking quickly. With the lighting. It's terrible over there. What if we use the landscape painting as a backdrop instead? The natural colors would complement our outfits better. It was a weak excuse, but it worked. Dad was always particular about photography, and the promise of better lighting was enough to convince him. We moved as a group toward the safer section of the hallway, Mom and Dad positioning themselves for the perfect shot while Emma fussed with her hair. Everyone smiled, Dad said, raising his phone to capture the moment, and then the world started to shake. It began exactly as I remembered, a subtle vibration that made the hanging artwork sway gently on the walls. But within seconds, the motion intensified, transforming from a gentle rocking to violent lurching that sent students and parents scrambling for cover. Earthquake. I grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her toward the nearest doorway, the safest spot I could remember from my emergency preparedness training. Mom and Dad followed us there, faces white with terror as they struggled to stay upright in the shifting building. Get under the doorframe, I shouted over the noise of groaning metal and falling debris. Stay away from the windows and ceiling fixtures. We huddled together in the relative safety of the doorway, watching in horror as the hallway transformed into a disaster zone. Display boards toppled over, sending artwork flying in every direction. Light fixtures swayed wildly overhead before crashing to the floor in showers of sparks and broken glass. And then, at exactly the moment I'd been dreading, the main support beam gave way. It happened with a sound like thunder, a deep groaning crack that seemed to shake the building too. Its foundation. I watched the ceiling collapse in slow motion. Massive chunks of concrete and twisted metal cascading down exactly where Emma's art display had been just minutes before. If we hadn't moved, if I hadn't insisted on the family photo in a different location, Emma would have been standing directly beneath that falling debris. She would have been crushed instantly, just as I had been in my original timeline. But instead, she was safe in my arms, trembling but unharmed, as we waited for the shaking to stop. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, staring at the destruction where her artwork had been. We were just standing there. We hadn't moved. "I know," I said, holding her tighter. "But we did move. We're all okay." Dad pulled both of us into his arms, his voice shaking with relief and residual fear. "How did you know to move us away from there? It's like you predicted exactly where the ceiling would fall." I met his eyes and saw something I'd never seen there before. Genuine recognition of my value. Real appreciation for my judgment and quick thinking. In my original timeline, he'd been so focused on Emma that he'd never even noticed my heroic actions. But this time I'd saved all of us, and he couldn't ignore that. "I've been studying earthquake safety," I said simply. I could see the stress, patterns in the ceiling, and knew that section was vulnerable. It was the truth, even if it wasn't the whole truth. I had been studying earthquake safety, just not in this timeline. The knowledge I'd gained from dying once had saved all of our lives. As emergency responders began arriving and coordinating the evacuation, I looked around at my family with new eyes. Emma was devastated about her destroyed artwork, but she was alive and unharmed. Mom and Dad were shaken and grateful, clinging to both of us with an intensity I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I had saved my family, not through self-sacrifice, but through self-preservation. I had protected the people I loved without destroying myself in the process. And somehow, that felt like the most important victory of all. In the aftermath of the second earthquake, everything changed. Not just the physical landscape of our town, which bore the scars of collapsed buildings and cracked roads, but the entire foundation of how my family saw me and how I saw myself. The story of how I'd predicted the earthquake and saved our lives spread quickly through the community. Mrs. Johnson, who had witnessed our last-minute move away from the collapse zone, told everyone who would listen about my quick thinking and earthquake expertise. The emergency responders interviewed me about my warning call, impressed by my technical knowledge and accurate timing predictions. Suddenly, I wasn't just the helpful daughter who faded into the background. I was Maya Chen, the teenager who had studied seismic patterns and potentially saved dozens of lives with her emergency call and safety awareness. Berkeley University reached out within a week, having heard about my earthquake prediction through their geological research network. Dr. Kim, the admissions officer I'd never gotten to properly interview, called personally to schedule a meeting. This time, though, I wasn't nervous about impressing her. I knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. Your combination of theoretical knowledge and practical application is exactly what our engineering program needs. Dr. Kim said during our video call, students who can think critically under pressure and translate their learning into real-world problem solving. I accepted their early admission offer without hesitation, along with a full scholarship that would cover all 4 years of my education. Mom and Dad sat beside me during the call, their faces showing a mixture of pride and amazement that I'd never seen directed at me before. Emma was genuinely thrilled about my acceptance, throwing an impromptu celebration dinner where she insisted on making my favorite foods and decorating the dining room with congratulations banners. For the first time in our family's history, the special occasion was about me. And everyone seemed comfortable with that shift. I always knew you were brilliant, Emma said as we cleaned up after dinner. I just don't think Mom and Dad realized how brilliant until you literally saved our lives. Maybe that's what it took, I said, carefully wrapping leftover cake. Sometimes people need dramatic proof before they notice what was always there. The months that followed were unlike anything I'd experienced in either timeline. Dad started asking for my opinion on structural repairs to our house, genuinely interested in my engineering insights. Mom began introducing me to her friends as my daughter, the earthquake expert, with genuine pride in her voice. But most importantly, they stopped treating me as the background support for Emma's achievements and started recognizing me as someone with my own goals and values. Emma and I grew closer too, bonded by our shared experience of surviving disaster together. She threw herself into rebuilding her portfolio with fierce determination, but she also made sure to include me in the process. When she got accepted to art school with a substantial scholarship, she insisted that her celebration party be a joint event honoring both of our achievements. We're both starting new chapters, she said, as we planned the guest list. It makes sense to celebrate together. The party was everything I'd ever wanted a family celebration to be. Friends and neighbors came to congratulate both of us, asking about my engineering plans with the same enthusiasm. They showed for Emma's artistic future. Mrs. Kowalski from the community center gave a speech about how proud she was of my dedication. 2. Earthquake safety, and several local engineers offered internship opportunities for my college summers. But the moment that meant the most came when Dad stood up to make a toast. To Maya and Emma, he said, raising his glass with tears in his eyes. I realize I haven't always been the father either of you deserved. I got caught up in trying to help Emma feel secure in our family, and in the process, I made Maya feel insecure in hers. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Mom nodded beside him, her own eyes wet. You've both taught us so much about courage and love and what it really means to be a family. Maya, your bravery saved our lives, but more than that, it opened our eyes to how special you've always been. I felt tears spilling down my cheeks as I looked around the room at all the people who were celebrating me, seeing me, valuing me for who I was, rather than what I could do for them. It was everything I'd dreamed of in those lonely years when I felt invisible. 3 years later, I was finishing my junior year at Berkeley when I got a call from Emma. She was now thriving at art school, her work gaining recognition in galleries across the state. But more importantly, she'd grown into someone who used her platform to speak about family dynamics and the importance of recognizing everyone's worth. I have something to tell you, she said, excitement bubbling in her voice. I'm getting married next summer, and I want you to be my maid of honor. Of course, I said immediately. I'd be honored. There's something else, though. Thinking a lot about what happened during the earthquakes, about how you saved us all, and I realized something important. I waited, curious about where this was leading. You didn't just save our lives that day. You saved our family. Before that, we were all playing these roles that didn't really fit any of us. You were trying to be invisible. I was trying to be perfect. And Mom and Dad were trying to manage us instead of just loving us. But when you stood up and demanded better, when you valued yourself enough to make different choices, it gave all of us permission to be real. Her words hit me with unexpected force. I'd been so focused on my own transformation that I hadn't fully recognized how much everyone else had changed too. I'm proud of you, Emma continued. It's not just for the earthquake thing, but for everything. For finding your voice, for pursuing your dreams, for showing me what it looks like to love yourself enough to demand respect. After we hung up, I sat in my dorm room thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. I died believing I was unloved and unimportant, only to wake up with the chance to rewrite that story entirely. But the real miracle wasn't the supernatural second chance. It was discovering that I'd had the power to change things all along. I just had to believe I was worth saving. Now, as I prepare to graduate with honors and start my career as a seismic engineer, I think about that 17-year-old girl who felt so invisible in her own home. I wish I could tell her that love isn't something you earn by shrinking yourself or sacrificing everything for others. Real love recognizes your worth without you having to prove it through self-destruction. The earthquakes taught me about fault lines and pressure points, about how tectonic plates shift when they can no longer bear the strain, about how families can crack under the weight of unequal love and unrealistic expectations. Sometimes it takes a disaster to reveal what was broken underneath. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it also shows you how to build something stronger from the pieces. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. This one hit the mark. You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.